Today we're going to move on to cells. We talked about the cells are the smallest thing that's considered alive, and you can only see cells through a microscope. So we're going to talk a little bit about first how they discovered the cell. The person that is responsible for actually discovering the cell is Robert Hooke. He used a compound microscope and he was looking at a piece of cork. The reason that we got the name cell is because it looks like, he thought that they look like tiny rooms in a monastery. So if you think of like a jail cell, how they're all just lined up right next to each other, and that's why we call them cells. Now, he wasn't the only person that that contributed to discovering the cell. There are many people that came up with what is called the cell theory. So after many observations, they came up with what is called the cell theory. And they summarized all of these discoveries that many of these scientists made. Some of the big ones were Schwann, Schleiden, and Virchow. They all had a different part to the cell theory. Now, what this cell theory states is three parts. First, it says that all living things are composed of cells, and cells are the smallest living thing. It could be, an organism could be one cell, or it could be multicellular like ourselves. Also, the cells are the basic units of structure and function. So if you think about ourselves, our structure are our bones, and all of our bones are produced of bone cells. We also have many different functions, and we have specialized cells that help perform those functions, like nervous cells, and your muscular cells. All of those will help your body function. And then the last one is that cells are all produced from existing cells. Some of your cells do not divide. A lot of your nervous tissue, those cells won't divide. That's why if you have a spinal cord injury or a brain injury, those cells don't reproduce, and that's why they can't heal. But other cells have to reproduce very often, like your skin cells, because once those die, you have to get new ones. So all of those cells have to come from existing cells already. All right. Now, there are two different types of cells. We have a prokaryote and a eukaryote. Pro actually means before, and when we think about a prokaryote, these were one of the first types of cells that were ever discovered or were ever around, because they were very simple and not very complex. A eukaryote, the U means true. This is the more specialized cells. So I'm going to go through what they have in common and what they don't. Now, one thing they do not have in common is the nucleus. A prokaryote does not have a nucleus, but a eukaryote does have a nucleus right there in the center of the cell. Now, like I said, these prokaryotes are very small and simple. They're like bacteria. They divide very rapidly because they are so simple. Now, eukaryotes are much more large, and they're complex. They have these membrane-bound organelles. Now, one reason it takes eukaryotic cells longer to divide is because it has to make sure each cell has its own copy of all of these organelles. Now, both of them do have DNA. All living things have to have DNA. Now, the DNA in a eukaryote is located in this nucleus, that little purple structure there. In a prokaryote, there is no nucleus, and this DNA, you can see some of the stringy stuff in there, they are just all throughout the cell. It is not bound inside of a nucleus. Some examples that you see of a eukaryote would be plants, animals, some fungus, and some protists. And then eukaryotes, like I said, they're just the smaller, simpler, such as bacteria. Another thing they both have in common is that they both have a cell membrane that keeps everything inside of the cell. They also have some organelles that are similar. They're just not the membrane-bound organelles that the eukaryotes have. And on Monday, we will get more into the functions of each of those organelles.